Now, I know I've been focusing a lot on Russia, but, it's kind of necessary sometimes, I guess. But yeah, this is just weird Russian military weapons. And to be honest, we might just do the ridiculously overpowered weapons next, because that just seems fun. Anyway, remember to like and subscribe and all that, and let's go on with the video. Oh, and remember to like and subscribe to Simple History. They honestly do brilliant content. I love their content.
Weird Russian weapons. For centuries,
that is a tank. Now, it's kind of before tanks were actually a thing, so I guess you could count it not as a tank, but also as a tank. It's weird.
Russian Empire, followed by the Soviet Union and the Russian Federation, had fought the Western powers for global domination. In this struggle, the act of warfare was usually the most effective tool. That was why the Russians paid great attention to their weapon production. Some of the best weapons the world has ever seen were dreamt.
AK-47, underwater machine guns, two weapons which are still used today in mass numbers.
Up in Russian design bureaus. However, the Russian engineers were known to experiment here and there, and sometimes create something that could possibly give the nation an edge over their rivals. Very often, these experiments resulted in some rather unusual weapons. These are some of the weirdest Russian weapons. The PSS Silent
I don't know this weapon.
Pistol. The PSS Silent Pistol, or the Pistolet Spesialny Samozarazny, is an unusual type of weapon, described as
I still think this exists.
Going beyond being silent. The PSS is a pistol constructed entirely differently from other silent pistols. What's unique about the pistol is that it has no silencer. Instead, it uses the special SP4 noiseless ammunition.
Oh, right. So it's not the gun itself. It's a weapon which can hold the cartridges, which makes sense. So I guess it's gas operated?
7.62mm by 41mm necked round SP4 ammo consists of a reinforced steel cartridge case with a powder charge and a special piston inside. The expanding gases drive the piston forward.
So yeah, a gas pistol. So we all know these. The pistol, the hot gases around it would launch it, and they don't seem to be too good at penetrating or distance. So I wonder how it actually got over that, unless it was a close quarters weapon.
Mild steel cylindrical bullet within the cartridge when a pistol is fired. Once the bullet leaves the cartridge, the piston seals it, leaving all gases inside. This way, the cartridge produces no sound, blast, or smoke. The PSS is designed to use the SP4.
Yeah, so this is actually a very cool weapon. So I know a lot about weapons, but I did not know about this. Add something to my repertoire.
Ammo only. The magazine holds 6 rounds, which are fed into a chamber using a self-loading principle. Another unique feature of the pistol is that the chamber is separated from the barrel, which moves rearward along the recoiling slide. The slide has a built-in stop that slows it down in order not to create any sound. With the noiseless ammunition and the special firing mechanism, the sound...
So yeah, I bet these are probably still used today for assassination missions.
...generated by the pistol upon firing is quieter than a hand clap. The pistol has a relatively small range of 50 meters. However, the round is only effective at a distance of 25 meters, at which it can still penetrate a soldier's steel helmet. Because the pistol was built for use in covert operations and assassinations, the short range is not really an issue. The pistol's primary purpose is to conceal its operator's whereabouts. The pistol was produced in the famous Tula Arms plant, and it was first issued in 1983 to the KGB Spets...
I thought it would be earlier than that, like mid-60s during the really hyped period of the Cold War, but then the 80s was as well.
...as units, and has been used by various Soviet and Russian special and secret service units ever since. The APS underwater rifle.
In fact, I just said about this, and I think you see this gun in Call of Duty Ghosts. You see this weapon in Call of Duty Ghosts. So I actually know a lot about this weapon. So how normal bullets work underwater is they will slow down drastically because of the particle makeup of water. Right, okay. Now these counteract that by being able to cut through it much easier.
Oh.
And I think it would initially go quicker if it was on land, but yeah.
Another weapon in the arsenal of the unusual Russian weapons is the APS underwater rifle, or the Automat Podvodny Specjalny. The APS is an AK family assault rifle especially designed for submerged use. Introduced in the mid-1970s, it was developed for underwater operations by Soviet frogmen. Up until that period, the frogmen were only armed with knives. The APS rifle allowed them to engage with their enemy from longer distances. The rifle's construction was based on
I think this could technically still be in use with the Russian army, with the Russian Navy, actually.
Gas-operated mechanism that was adapted for use in underwater conditions. The barrel was smooth, and a gas tube was perforated, allowing the water to get in. Unlike standard AK assault rifles, the APS fires from an open bolt to enable the barrel to fill with water constantly. The water in the barrel was necessary to stabilize the projectile. Since using conventional rounds under...
Right, so it's a steel dart, so that just means that it can cut through the water much easily, and it's much larger round. So in theory, because it's much larger but with much smaller tip, it will fly much further.
Water was pointless, considering that they lose their trajectory and penetration capabilities after only 3 meters. The APS was designed to fire special 5.66mm rounds with 120mm long steel darts. The round had standard 5.66mm by 39mm cases, sealed from water and filled with special propellants for underwater conditions. The long needle-shaped rounds allowed the frogmen to shoot underwater targets at distances of 98 feet or 30 meters at a depth of 16 feet or 5 meters.
Which is actually quite cool because you have to think underwater fighting does happen. And so stuff like this actually can change the tide of a war. Joke intended.
However, the weapon's effective range drops with increased depth and the pressure in the water. At a depth of 131 feet, the range is almost 3 times shorter, 36 feet or 11 meters. The rifle
but it's still a big thing.
Operates in semi and fully auto modes. It can fire outside the water, which is not recommended because it damages both the barrel and the mechanism and will diminish the rifle's service life. The rifle has a rather crude appearance and is distinctive for an unusually large magazine made from polymer that holds 26 rounds. However, despite the odd look, the APS underwater rifle is a reliable and effective underwater weapon. Apart from the former Soviet and present Russian armed forces, the gun is in use in the armies of 12 other nations. But now,
let me guess, the US.
Let's dedicate it to one. These are in. Click the link in the description. Ever was the gigantic SAR. Click the link in the description to try Magellan TV now. The SAR.
It's going to say that this is the first ever tank, but technically, given the definition of tank, the British Mark I was. So take this with a little grain of salt.
Tank. One of the most awkward Russian weapons ever was the gigantic SAR tank. It was an armored vehicle with a pretentious name, odd appearance, and almost no positive feature.
Yeah, it had like 4 machine guns. It was like 4 stories tall, with 1 massive wheel which could be easily destroyed and 1 back wheel for turning.
The SAR tank was not even
a rubbish engine, and it just used punch cards, I think.
Tank in terms of the standard tank concept. Instead, it was a huge gun carriage with an armored turret on top. At the time, Western countries were developing armored vehicles with Caterpillar tracks.
See, that is a French Renault tank, like we saw in the last video, and that was one of the best tanks ever, honestly.
The Russians got an idea to build a vehicle with wheels so large that it could handle any kind of terrain or obstacle. The result was the Tsar tank at 17.8 meters long, 9 meters high, and 12 meters wide. The gun carriage-looking vehicle had spiked wheels that were 9 meters in diameter. On top of the carriage, there were 4 turrets: the central turret, belly turret, and 2
spikes look like punch cards, but that's just me, I think.
Flank turrets. The turrets on the side were armed with two 76.2mm guns, while the turrets in the middle were equipped with 8 to 10 Maxim 7.62mm machine guns.
Which were
The ve-
rubbish. Honestly, they were unreliable.
It not only looked awkward, but also had a large amount of weak points. One of the most important was the vulnerability of the spiked wheels, and their size interfered with the gun's shooting trajectories. The tank would have probably never reached the trial stage if Tsar Nicholas II Romanov hadn't been so delighted with the scale model of the tank he was presented with. However, when the tank was brought out for a test run in front of a group of army dignitaries, it was a huge disappointment.
I think there's only ever been one found that still works.
The 60-ton tank got stuck in the mud. Its tiny rear wheels and the poor weight distribution made it bogged down in the rough and muddy soil.
And I think one of them flipped over because the front wheel was too big and the back wheel was too small. That's how rubbish this was. And honestly, I'm not surprised that Tsar Nicholas liked it. It was called the Tsar tank. And it looked weird. And Nicholas was weird. And if that wheel broke, the whole thing would collapse.
So typical of the landmass of Russia. The long-awaited wonder weapon that was to have given the Russian forces an advantage on the battlefield ended up on the scrap heap in 1923.
The Antonov A40 flying tank. So yeah, and it just was rubbish. Honestly, didn't work. The Antonov A40, I think, was never actually made it into an actual thing because it was too heavy to actually work. Because I think the A40 tank that it was going to use was too heavy to actually work. And what was meant to be it was meant to fly and then attack other planes. I think this was still like 1917 when planes and tanks weren't that very good, but yeah.
Antonov A40 flying tank. Tanks evolved a lot between the two world wars,
no, this is
especially
World War II. It's World War II, okay. Oh yeah, because the Antonov A40
their tactical deployment. By the time World War II started, military strategists had been thinking about various methods of how they could be delivered to the battlefield. One idea was by dropping them in from the air,
which would break the tanks.
The Soviets, along with other countries, had their own development program for airborne tanks. They conducted a couple of experiments for this purpose, of which the most interesting was the tank glider design. Behind this idea was the...
I think they would drop the plane, and for some reason they would also sometimes attack other planes. It was weird.
Legendary Soviet airplane designer Oleg Antonov. He envisioned delivering light tanks to battlefields or even behind enemy lines by attaching wings to them. The T-60 Light Scout tank was adopted for this purpose. Antonov fitted it with a detachable cradle bearing large biplane wings made of wood and fabric with a twin tail. The wings were pretty large.
It was a World War I plane mixed with a World War II tank. It wouldn't work, honestly. You don't combine World War I and World War II. That just doesn't work.
With a wingspan of 18 meters. In essence, this was a glider with a tank in the front instead of a cockpit. Even though it was an interesting concept, it proved to be unworkable, which became evident during the trials on September 2nd, 1942, when a TB-3 bomber towed the A-40 flying tank. To function properly, the bomber had to tow the glider at a speed of 100 miles per hour, or 160 kilometers per hour.
Which would sometimes detach the glider.
Considering the weight of the T-60 tank, this was virtually impossible. Nevertheless, the bomber managed to get the A-40 airborne, but had a lot of trouble towing it. In the end, the bomber pilot had to release the A-40. Surprisingly, the tank glided smoothly down to Earth and landed in a field not far from the airport, from where it was driven back to the base. However, the project was abandoned after the first trial, primarily for the towing problems. Apart from that, the concept had other issues.
Actually, I bet Lancaster bomber could tow that easily.
The tank had to be stripped of ammunition and some fuel to make it lighter. These things were dropped separately, which meant a delay in combat deployment until the crew located all their ammo and fuel.
Yep.
Another essential drawback was that by 1942, the T-60 was already an obsolete tank with weak armor and an even weaker armament.
Yeah, honestly, it was a rubbish tank, and it only would have really worked a few years previously.
After only one trial, the development of the A-40 was abandoned, as due to the ongoing war, the Soviets had no time to waste on unfeasible projects. The Tu-2SH Fiery Hedgehog. The number of various weapon experiments during World War II was astonishing.
Oh, I know this one. Yeah, it was called Fiery Hedgehog because it had machine guns coming down from the bottom, so it could attack large numbers of marching troops using it. And it had a good idea, but it wouldn't work. But then it kind of had the same idea as a bomber, except bombers wouldn't work for some of the missions they were trying to do. And yeah, so I think it's deployed once or twice. So it could be used airborne, or because it had a machine gun on the back, or it could be used facing the ground, which would be the ideal scenario. So it would fly low and just machine gun an entire area.
Belligerents were doing their best to gain the upper hand in the war, and the Soviets were no exception. As the war progressed, the Red Army was slowly taking the initiative on the Eastern Front. By 1944, their armored units were in full swing, and their Air Force had established supremacy in the air. One of the aircraft that played a key role in the Red Army's success was the Tupolev Tu-2. Even though it was designed as a dive bomber,
yeah, it was a dive bomber, but it shot machine guns at things, which was weird for a dive bomber. And that's where this concept came from. So it would dive down, and instead of, because this plane was vulnerable by doing that, but the Fiery Hedgehog wasn't. So it just meant they could do it much safer.
Tu-2 often provided fire support to infantry units on the ground, with its two 20mm Shivak cannons and three 12.7mm Berenson UB machine guns. In 1944, an idea was developed by the Tupolev Design Bureau to create a new version of the Tu-2 aircraft for its infantry support role. This version was named the Tu-2SH and was also known as the Fiery Hedgehog, and had a weapon battery cassette installed in the bomb bay containing 88 PPSH-41 submachine guns. Arranged in 11 rows, each with 8 guns, every PPSH gun had a standard 71-round drum magazine fitted. With the PPSH's astounding rate of fire of 1,250 rounds per minute, the Tu-2SH could deliver 6,248 steel-cored incendiary rounds in less than 4 seconds. The area covered by this fire was 550 meters long by 1.2 meters wide, so it would have been perfect for attacking supply columns on the road or railway trains. Unfortunately, as the guns were firing all those rounds, they were also spewing out an equal number of empty shell cases, which could fly into and damage the engines. Even though it provided some impressive firepower, the Tu-2SH had several limitations that prevented it from entering service. The combined battery of submachine guns would expend its total capacity of ammunition in such a short amount of time that it took 100 man-hours to reload it when the plane landed, because every drum magazine had to be detached from its gun and reloaded with ammunition by hand. Apart from that, the effective range of the PPSH-41 required the Tu-2SH pilot to fly at altitudes of less than 244 meters. At this height, the aircraft was vulnerable to enemy anti-aircraft and small arms fire. Finally, it was estimated that small-caliber cluster bombs had a more devastating effect against enemy troops, including armored targets. The Fiery Hedgehog, therefore, remained just another exciting experiment.
Which the Russians had a lot of. Anyway, it's the end of the video, so remember to like, subscribe and all that, and bye.